Okay, welcome everyone to our next episode of OKSA Connects. Today we're going to be talking about intersectionality. Research reveals two important experiences that I wanted to start our conversation with about intersectionality. Intersectionality is a term used to describe the ways systems of power exclude and oppress people with marginalized identities. Many of the folks in our audience may be aware of some of the disparity of youth who live with lived experiences in foster care compared to youth who are not. However, in addition, there's documented racial disproportionality and disparity in adoption and foster care for young people who identify as people of color. Furthermore, research indicates that LGBTQIA+ youth are overrepresented in the foster care system and face family rejection and community rejection around their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. When we consider the intersection of these three identities, race, LGBTQIA+, and being part of state custody, it becomes clear that there's an urgency to improve our competency when it comes to serving young people who belong in any of these groups. To help guide us through some of these conversations, we welcome our guest, Tymber Hudson. Tymber is a storyteller, strategist, and multidisciplinary artist based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Prior to their role at Hugh Lane Wellness Foundation, Tymber served as the LGBTQ+ policy associate at the Biden Foundation. Tymber managed a national public education and storytelling campaign, facilitated youth roundtables centering the experiences of young people with intersectional identities, and provided technical assistance and research support to other national youth-serving organizations working to implement LGBTQ+ inclusion and inequity in their programs, policies, and practices. Tymber has served as the congressional intern for Congresswoman Karen Bass and is deeply committed to centering, uplifting, and empowering Black LGBTQ+ communities to abolish systems that perpetuate injustice. Welcome to OKSA Connects, Tymber.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Hello, everyone.
So Tymber, I'm just going to start off with this first question. What are some of the experiences and issues that young people who identify as either people of color or LGBTQIA face in the foster care system or in any state custody system for that matter?
Absolutely. So I would definitely start by kind of reverting everyone back to that definition of intersectionality. Really intersectionality is about understanding how someone's identity creates a more intense experience with oppression, if you will. And so when we look at youth who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or that may also identify as LGBTQ+, a lot of times in care, they have reported feeling isolated, not feeling connected to community. Oftentimes within mental health settings, maybe some of their concerns are minimized. They're seen as symptoms of aggression, if you will, rather than true symptoms about their mental health concerns, if you will. A lot of young people in care, specifically LGBTQ+ young people, are their access to resources that they need, such as hormones, such as education about their gender, about their sexuality, about their race, is oftentimes used as a privilege, if you will. And so it's something that they have to earn. And so one of the disparities that I would say that is created by that is that this information that you have a right to is then held and used as a privilege. And so what does that do to you when you grow up in the system, when you want to know more about yourself and that is just held over you? If you get good grades this week, well, if you complete 1, 2, and 3, and yeah.
Yeah, it's like the ability to live your authentic life comes with these qualifiers and requirements that you have to, hoops that you have to jump through to be authentic.
Absolutely.
So there's possibly some folks in our audience who are not familiar with terms like intersectionality, disparity, et cetera. Could you maybe give some clarity around some of these key concepts that we talk about in diversity and inclusion?
Sure. So first, if you're unfamiliar with intersectionality, please look up Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She is the originator of the role of the word and the framework, and has a lot of good teachings on it. When I use intersectionality to specifically look at LGBTQ+, and well, I think of intersectionality as like, how do we look at it? How do we look at a person? Do we look at a person in their fullness? Are we taking into account their race, their gender identity, their financial standing, um, their health, their physical health, and so on. So like, are we looking at all of the components that makes this person a person? And are we looking at the ways that those components may um, change the way they interact with the world or even experience the world? And so intersectionality is really about more than just looking at a person and being like, oh yeah, they're okay because they have 1, 2, and 3. Like, are we really looking at this person, and are we examining what we are not seeing? What are we missing? And so on. I think when we think about disparities, we have to think about what are the experiences and what are the situations, maybe even barriers that create more obstacles for young people. Maybe that's obstacles to live their full and authentic self. Maybe that's also obstacles to have access to the resources that they need.
So when we think about disparity and oppression specific to young people who identify both as LGBTQIA and young people of color, what are some of the specific kind of either macro or micro disparities or oppression that as part of that experience?
I would say one of the most challenging disparities is probably having to both navigate racism, having to navigate transphobia, having to navigate homophobia, especially at like whatever age they're at. That's a young age to have to defend who you are to people that are supposed to be supportive adults in your life, if you will. I think that when we think of young people, specifically Black and LGBTQ plus young people that are within the system, I think one of the largest disparities that jump out for me is the not having access to the education about the community. What does it mean to exist as a Black person? What does it mean to exist as a person of from indigenous communities? What does it mean to be LGBTQ plus and live a full and abundant life? Too often we only have conversations around here are the issues that they're more prone to, or here are the experiences that are more often for them, or the harm or the discrimination. And that really weighs down and has an impact on the mental health of young people when all you hear is the negative about people that are like you, about communities like you. Yeah.
So a lot of the times young people who identify in these communities, it's like they're hearing only, what I'm hearing you say is they're hearing only kind of this kind of problem-based experience, or this like, here's the obstacles you have in front of you because of how you identify, as opposed to kind of the totality of that experience.
Absolutely.
And so how do you imagine this impacts the outcomes for those young people? So when you talk about these things, like they're hearing a lot of messages around kind of some of the obstacles or the challenges of their experience, and as opposed to the totality of it. What are how does that impact outcomes, would you imagine, for young people?
So when we're thinking of the outcomes, I would definitely say when I think of outcomes, I often think of aging out or just reaching that transition age of adulthood. I so often understand that Black and LGBTQ plus young people age out of the system without that support that they need, without the emotional support system, without the financial support, or having that support and it being guarded by institutions, if you will, or by people. I would say that not having access to the resources that you need when you are developing, when you are growing up, impacts the way you are able to show up in the world once you're finally able to. And so sometimes that means young people are, when we're thinking of like, what are the issue areas of where they show up most when they have negative outcomes, if you will. LGBTQ plus youth that spend time in foster care are overrepresented within homeless populations. When we look at all of the different populations, such as sex trafficking, such as just the reentry of poverty, and even the prison industrial complex. LGBTQ plus youth and youth of color who have spent time within the system are overrepresented. So often we talk about, the success stories, we talk about the ones who've made it or the programs that we're doing, but there's research that literally says 80% of people who are within prisons right now had spent time in foster care. And when we break down the racial disparity of that as well, that what does that tell people? What is that, if that doesn't move you to action, if that doesn't move you to feel something or to maybe, a red light, something's wrong, then we're again missing that.
Yeah, this overrepresentation is stacking on each other. It occurred to me that it's possible not everyone knows what it means when we use this term overrepresented. So can you talk a little bit more about when we say overrepresented, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so we're basically saying that these communities, such as Black and LGBTQ plus, are overrepresented within what it means to be overrepresented. It means you exist more within certain systems or certain environments, if you will. So to exist more in poverty rather than like the what is it called, the overall population. If you look at a subset of people, and you look at the subset of people who have experienced X issue.
Yeah, so and these aren't exact statistics, but to use some examples, if your community only represents 10% of the population, but in a system you represent 40% of that population, then you're overrepresented, right? It doesn't match the way reality is in a way. That's the way I would phrase it anyways. Excellent. So let's talk about systems. And when we say systems, we're talking about the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system for young people, and other systems, state systems, for example. So what are some ways that you feel like systems or organizations, so even at the organizational level, like here at the University of Oklahoma, how might they go about addressing these disparities and kind of raising the competence to support these youth?
So one of the things that I've seen a lot in the field is that organizations, both institutions as well as like systems, if you will, have started releasing RFPs asking for professionals to help guide them through this work. So hiring diversity and inclusion specialists, hiring gender and sexuality specialists, hiring youth development specialists to reform the system. When we look at the way that the system is currently existing, it's going to take more than just a competency training to really turn the tides and ensure that these young people have what they need. And so to do that, we have to really invest in that. We have to invest in the professionals that can lead us through that. But also, we have to listen to the young people. We always say we listen to the young people and we prioritize the youth voice, but I would argue that we could do better. And we have to do better about catching the youth voice across generations, right? So there's not a specific subset of young people that can speak for the entire experiences of young people, if you will. And so when we only focus between the 18 to 21 age and having these people be our young leaders, we're essentially just using their experience and then finding a new batch to use their experience rather than continuing and understanding how these issues that are continuing to what they call repeat themselves, if you will. It's a pattern. And it has to be disrupted. And it's disrupted by action. It's disrupted by us asking for help, for us doing the things that is necessary. There are a lot of different DHS or CYF, if you will, entities in different states that are leading this work in a very innovative way. They have, what is it called? One of the interventions for young people, specifically LGBTQ plus young people, is called Affirm. And it's an 8-week intervention that's based in CBT, that teaches a young person about what does it mean to how do you experience the world in terms of like discrimination and the impact of it? And how do you make a plan to deal with that, right? Too often we don't get to the how do you make a plan to deal with it, or we only focus on the how do you make a plan to deal with it rather than understanding how young people may interact with it. And so another part of really reforming or changing the system as it currently exists, if you will, is again, providing a way for young people to lead and create advocacy, their opportunities.
That sounds great. And I love what you said about we do a lot of awareness raising, but sometimes we fail to kind of take that next logical step, which is now that we're aware, what do we do next? An interesting thing that I noted in your introduction that you've done is this storytelling campaign. And you talked a lot about an important thing that systems can do is provide a platform for youth to kind of have their voice. But I'd love to hear more about kind of what a storytelling campaign entails and kind of how that kind of reaches some of those goals.
Sure. So I'll use As You Are as an example. So As You Are was a family storytelling campaign that I managed at the Biden Foundation. It's a family storytelling campaign that raises awareness about family rejection and the harms of family rejection, but also the positive outcomes of family acceptance and community acceptance. And so to do that, we did a number of things. There were videos created from national organizations such as the Trevor Project that just shared about people's experience with mental health, about people's experience with showing up in the world, within coming out, within facing rejection, but also within being wrapped in love. And so this was like a library of basically affirmations, if you will. You could go and you could see like, okay, these are a group of people who are raising a trans child, and they have wrapped them in support, and this is specifically where they got those supports. And so I think one of the important things about storytelling campaigns is really understanding the experiences of others. Like we sometimes only look to movies and TV, if you will, to understand, to try to understand, have that empathy, if you will, with other people's experience. But sometimes we have to look at people's experience, and we have to listen to those hard stories that are painful, that sometimes name us as the aggressor, if you will, because that's necessary for change. It's necessary for representation, if you will. One of my favorite things about the storytelling campaign was I got to bring a lot of different representation to it. And so of course it was about LGBTQ plus people and populations, but how could I really get down to the nitty gritty and like, not the nitty gritty, but how could I really just highlight different parts of the community that doesn't often get that representation, if you will. And so some of the things that I got to champion was definitely telling more stories about LGBTQ plus foster youth, or former foster youth. We did a beautiful campaign with a person who was both disabled and LGBTQ plus, and they just wrote a blog, but also did a video just about their experience and what that means to them, how they're able to show up in the world. And one of the amazing things about the storytelling campaign was just like an open submission, right? And so we had over 800 stories that came in from just across the US. Some of them were love letters for Biden, and others were just love letters thanking the foundation for having this platform. Thank you for showing us that we belong somewhere. Thank you for providing this representation. Thank you for having a pride flag, or just being that example that I don't need to give up, that I'm valid in who I am and my identity. And so I think one of the most powerful things that stories and storytelling campaigns can provide to people is affirmations. Sometimes, no matter what we do to affirm the person, we sometimes miss, right? Sometimes we aren't the person, sometimes we don't know what to say. Sometimes stories can be that person, it can be that what someone needs to connect to open up, if you will.
Well, I just think that that's a beautiful example of how I think it's easy to get overwhelmed with like, how do we change a whole system, or how do we take on racial injustice? It's a big thing, and I think it creates this feeling of maybe sometimes of being overwhelmed. But I think that that's a beautiful example of just how really it's these kind of simple things like creating a platform for voice and building empowerment, hearing those stories. I love what you said about just getting something besides just kind of created media, but like an authentic story to kind of help gain understanding and awareness.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of the folks in our audience are directly caring for young people, and perhaps even young people who identify as people of color, also LGBTQIA. And so I'm thinking about the poet Amanda Gorman, and she said "Be the light" in her poem at the inauguration. And so, if someone wants to be the light for a young person who identifies in one or more of these communities, what would you say to them?
I would say the first step in being the light is understanding that sometimes you're not that light. You can't be that light. And so understanding if you're the right person to be the light. If you can be that light, um, I would say ask the young person, how can I show up for you? How can I show up for you in a way that is authentic, that gets you the resources you need? Um, and so on. I think there's so much power in providing space for young people to speak for themselves, to formulate these ideas and make these asks, make these big asks. Budget isn't if budget isn't a consideration, what do you want for Christmas? Or if there is infinite possibilities, what does the next 2 years look like for you? What opportunities would you like to be a part of? And so on. We have to do more than just ask, how are you, if you will, or like how can I show up for you? If we just ask that, we can ask more. We can dig. Um, I'd say to be the light in young people's lives, uh, we need to let them lead. We need to listen to them. We need to do everything that we can to provide the support that they need and help them understand that they're not alone and they don't have to do everything alone.
Yeah, that's great. I love this idea of like just changing one simple word in that open question, right? As opposed to how are you or what's going on. It's how can I be there? It implies action, and I think that's really powerful. I imagine once you create that space and you open up that space, it's going to get uncomfortable sometimes. What advice do you have for folks as they start to enter into that space and realize, wow, I'm going to hear things that are kind of uncomfortable to hear?
Sit in it.
Just
Sit
sit in
in
it.
that discomfort.
Yeah.
It's a reality. Like, what else can you do? You've opened that door. You've asked this young person to share, or even to what do they need, and they've just told you. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to hear that, but now we have to sit with it, and we have to understand, what are we going to do to take action that is necessary. Sometimes being uncomfortable is necessary to learn. Sometimes being uncomfortable is a sign that you need more help, that you need to look at your community and the resources that you have to support this young person and ask, how can you provide yourself with more resources or more support so that you don't feel that discomfort? Where's the source of that discomfort? Is that discomfort personal bias? Is that discomfort not understanding what this young person needs despite them telling you? Or is this discomfort not feeling okay with doing what this young person needs you to do? Or is, like, we have to really unpack, what is that discomfort? I get discomfort. I sometimes feel discomfort whenever I'm getting ready to speak publicly. I get like a bubble in my throat, and there's so much like, okay, great. And it's even so much so whenever it's like virtually, it's like, why is that? But that discomfort is what it is. And it's like, it's good nerves, it's bad nerves. I have to figure out what it is. But discomfort can be broad. So we have to really lean into that. What is that discomfort, and how are we working to address it and not shy away from it?
That's great. For the young people that will watch this video or that are watching currently, um, and they sometimes struggle to find the light, right? And they're feeling maybe like there's no hope. Um, and, and they identify as one of these marginalized groups. What message would you have for them directly?
I would say that you are enough. I would say that success is whatever you define it as. I would say that sometimes it may feel like you're alone. It may feel like there's no one that understands you, and so on. But I would argue that there are people that are fighting for you, whether you know it or not. Um, I know that uh, the saying of "it gets better" is very cliche, so I'm not going to say that. What I will say is that healing is a journey, and it's a lifelong journey. And the sooner that you dig in, the sooner that you start to. I'm not going to say that.
Sorry, there was just a little bit of feedback.
Oh no, that's okay. No, healing is a lifelong journey. Um, so as long as you commit to that journey, as long as you stick through that journey for both the lows and the highs, it's gonna pay off. It's gonna be such a reward. And when you find the people that affirm you, that accept you, that love you, that challenge you to be better, and that maybe even piss you off because they say that thing that you don't want to hear, it's going to be so rewarding to celebrate with them and to see how far and
Yeah.
how happy feel that happiness from not giving up.
Yeah, I imagine one of the experiences that is especially real for young people here in Oklahoma is sometimes feeling isolated and alone. And there's a lot of distance between you and the rest of the community sometimes. And so what resources would you recommend for people, anybody, to grow more in their, well, first, what resources would you recommend young people specifically to kind of help them build that community, even if they're maybe there's not a direct community where they live, and navigate some of those unique challenges of either living in a rural space or living somewhere where they're feeling isolated, or feeling like they need to remain in kind of a stealth situation? What would you recommend?
So I would definitely look at Centerlink. Centerlink has what's called QChat. QChat is an online moderated space for young LGBTQ plus people to just have conversations with other people. Sometimes they have themed chats, other times it's just an open chat. So both can be very useful if you're just need to check in with some community, make some new friends. I know that Trevor Project is super helpful, both with providing resources for suicide prevention, but also for just providing spaces for young people that may be in crisis or near crisis to just have someone to listen, to have someone to support them, and to really give them what they need. I would just really look at a lot of different national resources, if you will, specifically for people that are within rural communities. It can be really hard to find LGBTQ plus specific or even race specific resources. So looking at different national organizations, I believe that the HRC has like a large list. And I even believe Centerlink has like a list of LGBTQ plus centers by state. And so that's a direct list of where resources are state by state. That can be useful to some people.
Sounds great. So now to expand that, so resources for anybody, including the adults who support these young people, to grow more in their understanding or grow more of their knowledge around the needs of youth of color who identify as LGBTQIA. What might be some resources that we can access? You had already mentioned the Trevor Project, which is a great resource, but are there others?
So Lambda Legal does a lot of great work, specifically on the front of protecting the rights of LGBTQ plus foster youth. So does Family Equality. They both have a lot of like reports and data and just things about LGBTQ plus families and youth that are really helpful. They also do a lot of advocacy with different states around passing LGBTQ plus legislation and policy that provides protections to young people. And so definitely looking into that will be helpful. I would say that PFLAG is really helpful, especially for caregivers, if you will. There are Ruth's House. Ruth's House is an organization that is in Detroit. And they run a housing center that is specifically for LGBTQ plus young people that have spent time in care or that are currently in care. And so looking at that model, is that something Oklahoma can replicate to make an opportunity for young people to help prevent some of those outcomes? Yeah, those are some of the first things I can think of.
Those are great. For folks who don't know, what is PFLAG?
PFLAG is, I have to get the acronym, but it's a national organization that provides resources for LGBTQ plus parents and caregivers. There are chapters in each, I believe in all 50 states. I may be wrong. But if you look at the national, they'll definitely tell you. PFLAG stands for,
If I recall, it's an ally group, yes, for
yeah,
allies. So either you have children who are identify as LGBTQIA or.
yeah. So I would say that it's mostly for, I believe it's a parent-led group.
Yeah.
And so it's mostly for parents and caregivers of young people, of LGBTQ plus young people. Sometimes it's LGBTQ plus caregivers and parents, if you will, but most often they provide resources. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, we have some time to open up questions from the audience. And so whether you're joining us via Zoom or you're joining us via Facebook Live, do you have questions that you would like to ask Tymber? And you can just put those in the chat or write in the message if you're on Facebook. Looks like we were pretty darn thorough, which is good. Yeah. Well, Tymber, it was such a pleasure to get to sit down and chat with you. You are, speaking of being the light, you are definitely the light for individuals everywhere, all over the place. If folks want to follow your light and kind of see what you're up to, how can they be in touch? How can they get in touch with you or check out what you're up to these days?
I just released a photo gallery with Columbia University, and I will be speaking at a convening there this Thursday. The name of the gallery is Garden of Vitality. I'll share the link with everyone, but it's a photo gallery to highlight the lives of Black and LGBTQ plus people who have been impacted by the system. So you can definitely check out that.
And that was at Columbia University.
Correct.
Yes.
That's
awesome.
a Columbia. And all of my work in social is through my website, tymberhudson.com. So let's connect.
Excellent. All right. Well, follow Tymber at tymberhudson.com if you want to keep up with what they're doing. Tymber, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you very well in all your future endeavors, and fully support you as you outreach to the world. Join us next time on OKSA Connects, when we will connect with Vanessa Morrison and continue this conversation about supporting young people of color here in the state of Oklahoma. So thank you very much, Tymber, and thanks everyone for participating.